This is a gameplay breakdown of how Mirandus mechanics are going to be so different than any other MMO out. I'm not just talking about the play to earn features here. I'm talking about how the gameplay mechanics of Mirandus could literally revolutionize the way that we play MMOs today. Don't get me wrong, making money inside the game is cool and all, but having actual scary death mechanics, having no centralized in-game map, one-of-one bosses, real player ownership of the buildings and land, and so much more. But before we get too far into the video, I first want to introduce myself if you haven't met me yet. So my name's Jake and I make speculative yet very informative content on the blockchain MMO Mirandus. And I do this by taking all the information that we've learned so far and breaking it down into small, digestible videos like this one for you guys to watch. So if you're looking for consistent Mirandus content and updates, then hit that subscribe button. I'd love to see you on this page again. If not, then I appreciate you stopping by and I hope to see you again sometime. We're going to set the like goal for 50 likes on this video because last time we did a 50 like goal, you guys obliterated that. So thank y'all so much. I think it hit like 110 or 120, which is a channel high for me. And the reason we do these like goals is so that we can spread Mirandus to the masses and bring more love to the game. But without further ado, let's talk about how Mirandus is different than other MMOs. Now I want to preface all this by saying that some of these mechanics might be in other MMOs, but if they are, they're not all put together. So I think that this culmination of new mechanics is really what's going to make Mirandus shine and literally potentially be the most popular MMO on the planet in the next decade. The first revolutionary mechanic that I want to talk about today is the one-of-one bosses. So having bosses in Mirandus that are 1-of-1 or 5-of-5 or 10-of-10, meaning once these bosses are dead, they're never coming back, and the loot drops that they drop, those are going to be the only ones in the entire game, which adds a whole new level of grind to beat a certain boss. Now, in most other MMOs, the bosses are just infinite, and that definitely makes sense to have in some games or in some parts of the game. But to have rare bosses, maybe they're end-game bosses, maybe they're event bosses, maybe there's a certain number of event Santa Claus bosses or Saint Nick bosses that drops down and you know you kill him and you get this cool Santa hat or something like that. I don't know. I really like the idea of having rarer bosses. That way those loot drops that maybe were common at one point are actually, 5 years from now, super duper rare. Kind of like the party hats in RuneScape. That's a great example of this. One last thing before we leave the topic of bosses. In the comments below, type your favorite or most creative or your funniest boss name that you can think of. We did this in a previous video and it was a lot of fun going through and reading them, but back then that was one of my first videos, so I didn't have a whole lot of people watching. Now that we're reaching a broader audience, it would be so cool if we could pick some more brains and hear some more funny names. Then to complement the one-of-one bosses is the death mechanic inside of Mirandus. Now the death mechanic, this isn't something that's like super extremely new. I know that most games try and penalize death, but the way that Mirandus is going about it is quite a bit different from most other games. So we don't have a lot of concrete information on how death is going to work exactly, but they've alluded to when you die, you can either you can pay the in-game currency, the in-game magic currency of Materium, to revive from the dead without any ailments, without any loss of anything, which is pretty cool. I like that idea. But otherwise, if you're poor like me, you're gonna have to wait. And by waiting, I think that they're going to play into the idea of having some kind of like, maybe you can walk your character around, but you just can't do a whole lot, or maybe his energy gauge is super low as opposed to what he would be if he was alive or not sick. I know that other games, like I said, have done something like this, but the idea of having to wait when you die, but being incentivized by either a rarity factor or a monetary factor inside the game is going to make you want to go out and kill things and want to go out and risk your life. But then when you do die, you either have to pay money or you have to wait. And not only that, it's been alluded to that you're going to lose experience points when you die. So you can't just go out there all willy-nilly and just keep dying to this boss, because you literally, after the first time you die to him, you're not going to be even close to as strong as you were the very first time you fought him. And that right there is going to be a huge, huge advantage to Mirandus for fighting bots. And by bots, I'm talking about like player run bots, because bots can completely ruin a game, and they're a really scary thing. The Mirandus team has talked about how they feel like they can control bots just by the gameplay mechanics themselves, because in most other games, and I won't get too deep into this because this isn't a video about bots, but in most other games there's not really any penalty to dying. Once you die, oh well, you lose your inventory, you keep going. But in Mirandus, if you're a level 5 and you're going out doing level 5 things, and then you die, maybe you're only level 2, or maybe you go all the way back to level 1, something like that. Or maybe you have to wait, you have to wait 30 minutes to an hour, which is going to slow down bots and also going to have to make them regrind up to where they were. And that's a whole rabbit hole. Another thing about the death mechanic in Mirandus is you're going to revive at cemeteries. So there's not going to be like a set spot where you revive, unless there's a cemetery there. And the cemeteries can actually change locations because, and we're going to get to this in the next mechanic, but the land and the land deeds and the buildings on those land deeds are actually going to be up to the players to decide where they are. So just because there's a cemetery there at one time, maybe either that cemetery moved or maybe that land deed moved, so you can't respawn at the most convenient spot anymore. Now, if there's a spot that's super convenient, that's actually going to also add some competition into the loop. So maybe there's 2 cemeteries next to each other in the same town, and because they're fighting for the most convenient spot to res to go to some dungeon that everyone loves. And if that's the case, then maybe the prices of the two they're going to get into a bidding war. So then prices of reviving without any ailments or reviving without losing anything is going to be lower and lower. So I think that's kind of cool. I love the bidding war aspect, and I love that idea of having to buy your business in a video game. So Ollie wanted to come introduce himself to you guys. He's been debating on whether or not to be in a video for a while, and he decided this is finally his time to shine. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the building and the land deed system. So how this is going to work is players own the buildings and the land deeds, and you have to have a land deed placed down before you can place your building down, which means that if you own a building, you can't just place your building anywhere in the world. It has to be on top of a land deed with the matching sized plot that your building is. So with that being said, me as a building owner am going to have to pay you who has the land deed that I want to place my building down on. Whether it's a percentage of the income of the building, whether it's a flat rate. There's been other games that do something similar to this. For instance, in Elder Scrolls Online, that's a game that I've played a ton of. They've got a clan that will purchase or rent out a specific location on the map to be able to sell their goods at for, I think it's a week long. And then after that, then it goes back to a bid. And whoever the highest bidder is each week, they get to keep that spot. And it's basically just a money sink for the game. No one actually gets to keep the money that's bid. It literally takes the money out of the game. Now, for this, you're actually going to be paying the person who owns that land deed. So you're essentially paying rent. But wait, how does this affect people who don't own buildings or land? Really? It doesn't. In fact, it really just kind of makes it more personable when you go into a shop, because you know that someone owns that shop. You know that someone decorated and upgraded that shop, as opposed to it just being some sort of NPC shop. That really gives Sword Art Online vibes, and I know I've talked about this in several videos, but I love the idea of Sword Art Online, not to getting stuck in a video game and, dying if you die, but the idea of you live inside the video game. Like, this is a real life simulation. That is someone's actual shop that they actually make money from. I love that idea. You're actually going to make money off of it, and as Jake Broski from On-Chain Gaming always says, you could pay your rent with money that you made in-game, just playing through a dungeon. How cool would that be? One more thing on top of the land deed mechanic is certain land deeds are going to have certain numbers of plots of places where you can grow crops or garden or field, whatever you want to call it. So say 3 5x5 field plots. Now, what that's going to do is, since fields aren't everywhere in the game and you can't just make a field in the game that we know of, and maybe you'll be able to, I'm not sure, but that's going to decrease the amount of a certain type of crop that enters the ecosystem, because Mirandus is going to have a fairly complex ecosystem in the sense that when you have a bunch of wood, you can't just like straight up convert that into a sword. You know, you're going to need metal ore. Maybe you're going to need a certain amount of materium. Maybe you're going to need to mix that metal ore, that iron ore, with some copper for the handle. And then you also need some wood for, I don't know. There's going to be lots of things that go into that. So if we're talking about crops and say we're making alcohol, we're going to have not only the building of a brewery to make it. I really don't know what goes into alcohol, so this might be a bad example, but you're going to need wheat, and you're going to need other ingredients that typically go into that stuff to be able to actually make the finished product alcohol. You can't just take an ingredient or two to a crafting table and then all of a sudden you've got a mug of beer. Now, the next mechanic I want to talk about is something that actually reminds me of Minecraft a lot. So if you haven't played Minecraft, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But in Mirandus, there's not going to be a centralized in-game map, which means when you're walking around, this is all based on either your memory or a map that you bought from somebody who made that map. And only cartographer exemplars can make maps. And an exemplar, if you don't know, is just like a playable character inside of Mirandus with special abilities. So, with that being said, if you're out exploring someplace that's never been explored before, you have no idea where you're going. And you're walking around with these super potentially dangerous creatures, and the death mechanic is super severe. So with this culmination of different mechanics, it actually instills fear in you when you're playing a game. And like there's no real, you don't really get that anymore with many video games. If you die, oh well, you just run back to where you were, no big deal. But in Mirandus, I really think that you're going to be incentivized. There's a very big incentivization, There's a big reason to not die. They've also talked about how they want the map to be ever changing and how they want to involve even the earliest plots of land in late game content, or just 6 months, a year down the road, so that land isn't forgotten about. With that being said, I'm going to take something that we talked about earlier and combine it here again. So imagine them doing some sort of event boss, but at a place that everyone's familiar with, so that everyone who participates in this maybe gets something small, or depending on how much damage you did, maybe something a little bit bigger. I don't know. I think that that's really cool, and it's going to involve the entire map. That way there's not some place that just gets thrown under the rug, because that would, I don't know, that happens a lot in video games, and I wouldn't say that I'm sad about it, but at the same time, it would be cool if that wasn't a thing. You know what I mean? I don't lose sleep over not going to Lumbridge and RuneScape anymore. Now, one last thing on the maps is the idea that since maps do change and the landscape does change over time on that map, imagine buying a map towards the beginning of the game, and then a year later the landscape has changed so much, so even though you might have a map of that area, it could be slightly outdated, and there could be new things on that map, whether there's a new cave, whether there's a cave that disappeared, whether there's monsters, a monster spawn that wasn't there before. There's several different things that can change. They can always make the game more fun and add to the replayability. The last gameplay mechanic that I want to talk about, and this is, I don't know a whole lot about this. It's only been mentioned once, so if you're watching this in the future, you can laugh at me if I'm way wrong. But they've talked about how they want to have some sort of adaptive learning AI, I think is what they called it. My memory might be wrong on that, but basically what they're referring to is the monsters inside the game are actually going to learn as they fight you. So they're going to get smarter over time, which is terrifying. So something maybe in the beginning of the game when you fought these certain type of goblins, 3 months from now, and you go back and fight them, they may have learned how people in the first few months, beat them, and learned a way to fix that. They're actually going to have they're working to have some sort of mob mentality where these guys actually react like they would in real life. They've talked about how goblins will have languages. There will be an actual goblin language. So how cool would it be if you hired some sort of mercenary interpreter that knows the language of the goblins or something stupid? I think that would be kind of fun, and that would just add to the full dive into Mirandus, and it not just be a video game, but literally like an alternate reality. So I feel like I've rambled on for far too long. I think this video is going to be a little bit longer than I expected it to be. I'm just super passionate about Mirandus, and I love talking about it. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Thank you so much. If you like this video, remember we're shooting for 50 likes on the video, so it would be really cool of you if you hit that like button. And also let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. Seriously, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace, guys.